My name is Ashley Sousa. I am a history instructor here at West Valley College. I'm also a graduate student in history, getting my PhD. I'm at the dissertation stage. And thus far in my life, most of my research experience, in fact, I would hazard guess that almost all of my research experience has been doing primary and secondary historical research, either for term papers in college and graduate school, for writing essays talking about different arguments in history and how different historians interpret events, and now most recently working toward my PhD dissertation, which is history of Indian workers at Sutter's Fort in present-day Sacramento. Most of the information that I've been obtaining for my dissertation has been what we call manuscript material. So it tends to be journals, collections of letters, documents, business records, things that are handwritten or typed, typically really old, musty papers. And they tend to be housed in libraries, and the main libraries that I've been doing research at lately have been the California State Library, which is a great place. It's a home to a lot of the manuscript material, old diaries and records and things relating to California history from way back in the day. And also the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley, which is has been somewhat of a less great place to work. It's been in a weird transition facility because they're earthquake retrofitting the building. But typically libraries overall. So historians' research is sort of a lone wolf type of activity. You're in there by yourself with the papers a lot. Which if you're somebody who likes to work uninterrupted and really kind of be alone with your thoughts is a fun way to work, I think. This has been probably the biggest learning process of what I've done as a student and as a graduate student. You have to really learn how to use the search methods that are provided by these library websites. So it's sort of like part sleuthing skill and part knowing how to use the technology. So for example, the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley has a website where you can search materials by keyword or subject area. And it has a little pull-down menu where you can limit the search to manuscript material. So that's what I usually do. That's usually what I'm after. And so I would type in something like California Indians or John Sutter, Sutter's Fort, which also goes by the name of John Sutter's sort of larger ranch, which is New Helvetia. And so it will return everything that has New Helvetia, Sutter's Fort, John Sutter, whatever it is that you've put in. It'll return a list of everything that includes that as a keyword or as a subject, and only things that are manuscript material. So you can usually sort of sort through by looking at the detailed records and determine what it is that you want to look at. But what's really weird or different about doing research in archives that have manuscript material is that you can't just go to the shelf and pull it off like you would a book, right? You have to go up to the front desk and page the material because it's typically really old stuff, very delicate. They want to make sure that you treat it very delicately whenever you use it. And they'll go back into some vault somewhere in the back of the library, some sort of pressurized, humidity sealed, hermetically sealed type vault, and bring out the papers for you to look at, usually in boxes. And then you get the really exciting experience of then opening the boxes and literally flipping through papers that were written by, some of the most important names in 19th century California history. That's my era, is really the 1840s and 1850s. So you get to hold on to things that John Sutter himself actually touched and wrote about and see his correspondences, which is fun. Probably that's the best advice I could give any student that's thinking about transferring out of West Valley and into a four-year college or university, and that is spend time at the library. Don't think that you're limited by what you think you know how to search on the internet or on a website. Talk to a reference librarian. I found, at least here at West Valley, that the reference librarians are excited to help you try to track down stuff that you don't already know how to track down. So a lot of how I've learned how to do it is through trial and error, but also having professors and librarians that just sat me down and were like, duh, dummy, here's how you do it, and then you're never going to know unless you ask. So that's been really huge. But when I was an undergraduate, when I was in community college, and then after I transferred to UC Davis, I had no idea what I was doing, right? I have to write a research paper on some topic, and it was like, you know, where's the material? You know, just groping in the dark. This is how I was supposed to have been doing it, you know, all along. Learning how to do advanced searches. What I had been doing, and I think this is probably a strategy that a lot of students use, I can't imagine that I'm too unique, is, okay, I have to write a research paper about the Civil War. So you find one book about the Civil War, you locate it on the shelf in the library, and then everything you know about the Civil War comes from that one shelf on the library where you were able to locate a book. I had no idea how to search for journal articles, so there was a whole world of like brand new scholarship in short journal article form that I could have been making good use of that I just didn't know how to locate, you know. Now, of course, I was in college in a period of time where you couldn't find that stuff online, so you would have actually had to go look up the journal, but I had no idea how, an index, you know, I had no idea how you would find out what articles on what topics were to be found where. So that was something that I kind of figured out really at the last minute. With help from a reference librarian who was like, duh, dummy, here's how you do it. Why have you been suffering in silence? But then, you know, working with the archival materials, trying to figure out, you know, where would I find these? What kinds of materials might I think I want to look at? Because about 90% of locating the good, you know, manuscript materials, the old diaries and stuff like that, is just knowing that they exist, right? Knowing that there's somebody out there that wrote something that's in some library somewhere that you might want to look at. And so through a combination of gentle librarians who took me under their wing and really helped me out in figuring out how to limit my searches and find the right things, but also in looking in to see if I thought that, hey, this book is really interesting, this is a topic I'd like to write on, well, let's look back in the footnotes. What sources did this author identify as being really important? So I find that about 90% of my searching is, oh, hey, if I'm writing about California Indians, well, Al Hurtado writes about California Indians. Let's see what he has to say. Where did he find his material? And then I just kind of retrace his steps. Or you know, any one of, you know, a dozen or more different historians who have worked in the field that I'm interested in. You just retrace their steps.
By using their bibliography?
Yeah. So if I see that Al Hurtado looked at the diary that John Sutter left behind, detailing the day-to-day operations at Sutter's Fort, and that's something that I could find at the California State Library, you know, you bet your bum that as soon as I went into the California State Library, I was like, all right, you know, I want the journal, right? That's the first thing I went for, because it was something that somebody had already identified as being a useful source. And then the other 10% is serendipity, because typically with you know, manuscript material especially, you get a box of stuff that you kind of know what it is because you read the detailed record when you looked up the record on the website, the library website. But in almost every major manuscript collection, there's a box at the very end or a folder at the very end that's random stuff, you know. And so sometimes you just have to sort through some randomness and you find really cool stuff. Probably the best example I have of turning up something really interesting and random was when I was at the California State Library last summer. I was looking for any kind of references to Indians doing work in California in the 1840s and 1850s that might anywhere be around the Sacramento area. And so I was at the tail end of a collection of just old California pioneer stuff. And there was the random box of random things, and I'm sifting through it. And it's a lot of junk. It's a lot of stuff I don't need. But I came upon a copy of an indenture record from Colusa County in 1856. A local farmer had indentured a 5-year-old Native American girl to be basically, essentially his slave until she turned 21. And this is really, it was very depressing, but it was a cool find because in the 1970s there were a series of scholars that did a lot of work exploring Native American labor and especially unfree labor, slavery, indentured servitude, things like that. And they went from county to county looking up these indenture records. And some of the counties that had the best indenture records, like Humboldt County, for example, the scholar came, copied down the records, wrote something about them, and then they mysteriously disappeared from Humboldt County. So, you know, it's not clear if Humboldt was attempting to erase an unpleasant aspect of its history or if it was a legitimate, like, whoops, we lost it. But these are a rare resource to find. And it wasn't something that I could immediately use in my dissertation. It was past my time period, and it didn't involve New Helvetia, which is, Colusa County is a little far north for me in my geographical area. But it was something that I was able to pass along to two different colleagues of mine who were working in the field, who were thrilled to have this resource that otherwise, you can't comb through every box looking for random stuff. So they were thrilled to realize there was something out there they could use that they didn't have to hunt for. There are a couple of strategies that researchers working in archives with manuscript materials can employ. There is the sort of kitchen sink method, which is you find a body of records, so one particular collection, say the John Sutter papers, and you think, okay, I'm going to be here for 2 days, and there's 18 boxes of stuff for me to look at. I'm just going to ask the staff to photocopy everything, and then later on I'm going to take it home and I'll sort through and see what'll be valuable, and then I'll highlight it in some way, put Post-it notes on it, whatever. But typically, when you have a choice in how you want to pursue the research, you take your laptop with you, and you actually, save your money. You don't make all the photocopies, and you go through the records. And then I do a pretty low-tech method where I just open up a Microsoft Word blank document, blank Word document. And as I find things, I'll take note of the date that the thing was produced, right? So if it's a letter or a journal entry or something like that, what date it's from, what collection it comes from, the John Sutter collection. Is it a diary? Is it a letter? Who's the letter to? From where was the letter written? Because this kind of information is usually standard in 19th century letter writing. They always tell you where, this is where I'm writing from. And any pertinent quotations. And I tend to deal in quotations. I try to take it word for word because I don't want to go back later on and find, okay, now what did I mean when I said he said some stuff? I want to make sure I know exactly what was stated in the particular source that I'm looking at. I always have like a running commentary with my notes. I usually do in brackets. Afterwards, I'll note like, what in the heck is he talking about? Or if this kind of rings a bell and I remember, hey, I think this letter was being written at roughly the same time that he recorded something completely different in his diary. Let me make a little note, go back and check his diary, right? Something that I don't want to do in the moment, but whenever I actually sit down to piece together the book, I'm going to want to know, what was going on at the same time. What I like about research, and I've been kind of a late comer to enjoying research. I think I struggled with it for a long time, and I'm finding that the better I get at it, the more I enjoy it. What I really find to be exciting, and especially like this past summer when I got to spend the whole summer doing it, was that I could immerse myself just completely because you're by yourself. It's just you and these records. The reading room in the library is silent. Over the summer at the California State Library, I was the only person there. Almost every single day I was the only person there. And you're just immersed in trying to reconstruct this world, this long gone world. And nobody on earth is going to understand this world the same way that you do, right? Just like, in a court case, the defense team and the prosecution could look at the same group of evidence and come to different conclusions about the guilt of the suspect, the person on trial. Historians look at the same body of evidence, or maybe slightly different bodies of evidence, and come to radically different conclusions. And so, you're a detective, you're a lawyer arguing a case. You have like just the angle of being interested that it's something interesting that happened in the past. So you get to kind of play all these roles. And yeah, I mean, if my poor husband had a dime for every time I had sent him a text message or an email, like, oh my God, this is so exciting, he could probably pay somebody else to write the dissertation for me at that point. But so it's that kind of thing where you're just so like deeply immersed in a world sometimes that's hidden even from other historians, right? So sometimes you're doing research and you're like, gosh, why didn't so-and-so use this whenever he or she wrote about this or that? Wow, I get to use something that nobody's ever discussed before. I'm like the only person who's ever seen it. When you don't know how to do it right, it's brutal. When you spend most of your time searching in vain for something that you know is out there but can't find, that's incredibly frustrating. So I think in the early years of graduate school and as an undergraduate, I found research to be very frustrating for that reason. I find them more quickly now. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the learning curve, it's one of those things that you muddle through a lot of trial and error, I think, in order to get down a pattern and like a rhythm of research and to figure out, because everybody's pattern of doing the research is different, right? Like I have friends that are very methodical, right? Who, before they even go into a library, have a list of everything they're going to look at. Boom. But I tend to be like more fanciful in how I do my research. Like I have a rough idea of what I want to look at, but I like to follow leads. I get a lot of dead-end leads, but I like to follow leads like, there's this one reference to this really sort of like, esoteric person that we only see once in the entire historical record. Maybe this person is the key. If I could just find something more about this person, maybe then I would understand everything, and then I find nothing. So I'm a little bit more like, let's see where the day leads me. Let's see where, if I find something interesting, I might pursue it. If I don't, then maybe not, So I try not to stick to the list, which probably eats up a lot of time. But, you could also be very methodical, like, I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna look at this, boom, I'm done, I go home. I recently had the opportunity to attend the conference, the annual meeting for the American Society for Ethnohistory, so like all the history nerds in my field. And it was really exciting because at these academic conferences, these are chances for people writing in a particular field to showcase some of their newest research. So the conference is organized into panels around themes and subjects. And so you kind of look at the day's schedule and you can decide, well, I really want to see something about California Indians, that's my thing. So I'm going to go to this panel presentation and this panel presentation. Or, well, this one over here is not really about California, but they're studying Native Americans in the workplace, so I'm going to go to, to see these ones. And then it gives you a chance to see what resources other people are mining, what people are doing with those things, because, you have a certain set of ideas about what happened based on what you found, but again, like the next guy over is going to have a completely different set of ideas based on seeing the same, the exact same evidence. So it was very exciting, the opportunity to see other scholars working on some topics dealing with California Indians and work, domestic service in one case, and farm labor in another case, that are really vetting some of the most current new ideas that are out there. And so at this conference, I had the chance to approach one woman who was working on domestic servants, Indian women who were employed or indentured or enslaved to work as domestic servants. And so I was able to pass on that indenture contract to her, which she was very grateful for, and it was very exciting for her to see it. So, you can kind of bounce ideas off of people. Academics love cocktail parties, so there's always ample opportunity to meet up with people later on at cocktail parties and receptions and discuss ideas. Journals, academic journals, always showcase the newest scholarship in any given field. So, if you, and students don't like to deal with journals because you tend to have to actually go look at them physically, and hold them in your hand. And I know that now, being the digital age, we like to do things on the internet. But if you can get your hands on current issues of journals, and not just in history, I mean, there are journals for anthropology, sociology, psychology, medicine, biology, every scholarly field has its journal. Then you're going to see in the most recent issue, honest to God, the most recent scholarship, the most recent findings that people are making. So if you're a student, say, writing a history paper, and you want to know, what scholars are saying about, the Civil War right now, the role of slavery in the Civil War, go to the most current issues of journal articles, and you'll know, right? If you're writing a research paper, say, for an English class or a history class or a sociology class, and you're developing an argument based on evidence that you've collected, you can compare your argument to what other scholars have argued, other findings that they've determined, so you can do a little comparison. In graduate school, it was a wild ride by the seat of my pants, right? When I was a student and writing term papers and things, it was sort of like, okay, so I have all this stuff, so I'm going to cut up. I'm going to print up all my Microsoft Word files with all this data. I'm going to cut it into strips, and then I'm going to try to paste the strips on a piece of paper in roughly the order that I think it might work out in the paper. So that was a strategy that I employed, and it's visual, which is helpful. Like, you can see a progression of how a paper or a story is going to unfold. Sometimes I, in the past, have used index cards. Now, this is before laptop computers were standard, back in the olden times for the students. And so I would write down, what I found on index cards, and then I would shuffle the index cards. And then by flipping through the stack of index cards that I had put in order, I could roughly have like the paper outlined for me, that way. How I'm going to do it this time kind of remains to be seen. I have a feeling that a book-length project, like the one I'm working on, a dissertation, they usually want it to be somewhere on the order of 200 to 250 pages. I don't think I'm going to be able to employ the same strategy that I employed for a 20-page research paper. So for the book-length project, I think that the cutting up the information into strips of paper and gluing it together, or the index cards, is going to be not workable. So a couple of pieces of advice that I've been given is that if you've saved everything into Microsoft Word files, you can do a search either through Windows or your operating system, or even in Microsoft Word sometimes, to try to find references. So if you're, for example, if I wanted to write a chapter of my book about Indian fur trappers in the Sacramento Valley in the 1840s, I would look up fur or trapping, right? And then it would bring up a list of all the files that contained references to fur or trapping, or whatever the search term that I would use. The research part's the easy part, the writing's the hard part.
Well, maybe talk a little bit about that, about how do you go, what's hard about it, and then how do you overcome that?
Sure. And this probably is maybe less about research and writing and more just about like usable advice that students can take just, you know, into college and university and beyond, graduate school maybe even with them. And that is that it's a trial and error process, and it's hard work.
This is the writing itself.
Yeah. So to encourage students not to give up when it gets hard, to not give up if the grade is not what they hoped for, that in writing, trying to sort through your ideas, not doing it so well, and then going back and doing it over again, that you learn that writing is absolutely hard, and not to be daunted by that too much, because everybody finds it hard. You know, when you take a history class from, you know, Miss Sousa at West Valley College, understand that she finds it as hard to write papers as you do, you know, and not to feel like chugging through the process is really the value. Not the A or whatever grade you end up with at the end, but it's going through the process that's really the value. And you truly do, you know, as the cliche goes, get it out of it what you put into it. So, you know, the struggle is part of what makes the experience valuable. I'm somebody who is a procrastinator, as many of my students who may or may not be watching this will know. And so I find that unless I have like an axe that's ready to drop on my neck, I have a hard time sitting down to crank out ideas, right? And this is the problem that I often kind of highlight for my students, and that is whenever you are really using your brain and thinking critically, you are mentally, intellectually going out on a limb, right? So I'm all excited about my research, but if I had to commit all that to paper and share it with people who are experts in my field, that's terrifying, right? Probably similarly to students who, you know, think that in class they're like, oh yeah, we totally know what she's talking about, but whenever they have to sit down and commit that to paper, it's like, oh God, you know, you just seize up and you're like, I'm paralyzed with fear and uncertainty. At the moment where you're like, I don't want to commit this to paper because, oh my gosh, what if I'm wrong? Like, I can't, it's not in the textbook. Miss Sousa didn't tell me it's so. I didn't read it in that other book or in that other journal article. That's probably where you're actually onto something interesting, you know. But it's terrifying, you know, at least if you're an academic who, you know, has a lot at stake in the writing process. So it's terrifying to put your ideas out there and have them observed by other people. And I think that contributes a lot to like the feelings of writer's block that people have, which is absolutely related to research, because, you know, your research is the building blocks for you to explain this new view that you've developed on how or why something happened, you know. So, you know, putting yourself on the line, you know, to explain this is my view and this is why I think that, you know. Yeah. But as soon as you find yourself going, oh, I'm on thin ice, I'm on real shaky ground here, I'm not 100% sure, then you're probably thinking something important. Well, I imagine that with science, there's a certain value in being able to repeat it, you know, repeat an experiment and know with certainty that if you've done the experiment 100 times and 100 times you've gotten the same result, that probably is the way the world works. But unfortunately, historians, we work from incredibly incomplete evidence. We can't recreate in the same way that a laboratory for a scientist can recreate certain conditions. So for historians, you know, that level of uncertainty is, you know, a surefire way of knowing that you're on the right track to something original. Because if you feel 100% certain that that's how and why something happened, that's because somebody else has told you. That's not your original thought, right? We kind of rely on that.